Okay, so we'll start off with just completing the thought from last time. I forgot to finish off what I was saying then. So we spoke last week about the creation of the sky on the second day of creation. And we spoke about the fact that there's two names for the skies. There's Rakia and there's Shamayim. And there were a few different explanations for those different terms. And there was the kind of spiritual idea where there's this the spiritual reality that's referred to as Shamayim or Rakia. But we also spoke about more of a rationalistic way of explaining it, that the Rakia is the sky that we see, and the waters above it is the clouds, and then the Shamayim is outer space. I'm going to turn off the sound because I hear there's like a echo somewhere. Here we go. Okay. So if anybody has a question, you can raise your hand and I will turn it back on. And we raised the difficulty that if Rakia and Shamayim are two different things, then why are they referred to by the same name? Because it says that Hashem took the Rakia and he called it Shamayim. So he had already created Shamayim, which we're saying is outer space, and then he creates Rakia, which is the sky, and then he calls Rakia Shamayim. So why does he change the name there? So we raised that difficulty, and I forgot to get back to answering it. So I'll present this the way Rabbi Hirsch answers it. Rabbi Hirsch suggests that when we talk about Shamayim, we talk about outer space. We have a relationship with outer space. It's part of our lives. We have the sun, which gives us heat and light, and its gravitational pull helps out too. We use the moon. The moon gives us light at night, and it gives us tides, and I'm sure it gives us a lot of other things. We use the stars to navigate. I imagine on a pitch black night, they would also add some amount of light, although we city people haven't experienced that. But we use, what goes on in outer space is very important to us. However, we don't experience outer space on its own terms. If we were to stand 93 million miles from the sun, which is where we are, and not be on Earth, we were just to stand, let's say, on the moon, and let's say we were to take off the spacesuit and just stand directly in the sunlight, we would immediately burn up. And if we were standing in the shade on the other side of the moon, we would immediately freeze. If we were to wear a visor which was not tinted and look at the sun, or even look in the direction of the sun, we'd probably go blind. The way we experience outer space is through the lens of the atmosphere. So for us, Rakia is Shamayim. We look up at the sky and we see Shamayim. We see whatever's up there. We see the sun and the moon and the stars, but only as filtered through our atmosphere. We have no idea what it looks like up there. Just to be in space and to see all that, we've never seen it, and we couldn't relate to it. We'd just die if we had to experience that. And therefore, for us, Rakia is Shamayim. So if a child tells you the sun is in the sky, he's really correct, because the sun as we experience it is in the sky. And the moon as we experience it is in the sky. The color of the sky, even though the sky is really an illusion, it's just air and refracted light, but the sky is a real thing that we benefit from and we need. We need the sky to be there. We need the atmosphere, aside from the fact that we breathe it, but we need the atmosphere to be there in order to experience the heavenly bodies, the different orbs that are in space. So in that sense, Rakia very much is Shamayim for us. And that's why Hashem calls Rakia Shamayim, because as we've said a number of times, the primary concern of the Torah is not what goes on in outer space. It's what goes on here on earth. It's what goes on for us. It's the instruction that we have of how to relate to Hashem. And for us, Rakia is Shamayim. For us, the sun is in the sky, and as we see it, is what it is for us. We'll move on to the third day of creation. We're in chapter 1, verse 10. On the third day of creation, well, let's say at the end of the second day of creation, there was the water. The water had been separated between the upper waters and the lower waters, but on earth, the upper waters were cleared away into the clouds or wherever else they are, but the lower waters were covering the whole earth. So the water was everywhere. There was no dry land at the end of the second day of creation. And that's where we begin with verse 9. Vayomer Elokim, Hashem said, Yikavu hamayim, let the waters gather. I'll translate that more accurately. Let the waters be gathered. This is written in the passive voice. So it doesn't say let them gather, it says let them be gathered, become gathered, passively. Mitachas hashamayim, from under the heavens, meaning because the water in heaven is already there, but the water on earth was to gather el makom echad into one place. V'seiro hayabasha, and let the dry land be seen. Vayichen, and it was so. So here Hashem separates out, the water was covering all of earth, and Hashem separates the water into the oceans, and the dry land is revealed. Now, so if we read that into this verse, it all adds up to one command. Yikavu hamayim, let the waters be gathered. V'seira'eh hayabasha, and then the earth, the dry land, will be uncovered, will be visible because the water moved away, but the earth had already been there. So I'm not going to attempt to decide between these two giants. It's not for me to decide. But in my little head, I think Rashi seems to read a little better in the way this verse is worded. So let's work with that explanation for now. That the dry land existed, it was just under the water. The water had to be moved away into the oceans, and now the dry land is visible. Now, exactly how did that happen? What changed? What did it look like before, and what did it look like afterwards? How did Hashem make the water end up in the seabed, in the basins of the ocean? Well, it doesn't really matter. We can't really picture ourselves as a fly on the wall watching the creative process, because we don't really understand how this works. I mean, what does it even mean when it says that Hashem said, "Let the waters be gathered"? What does that mean? Was there an audible announcement that Hashem made? Did he audibly say the words? Were there sound waves, reverberating throughout the universe that let the waters gather? I don't see any need for that. I don't see why he should have needed to do that. He could have just thought it, and it would have happened. So it's we don't really know what happened. As soon as Hashem said it should happen, it happened. But I think what is important is for us to analyze how the Torah presents this event, because the Torah is going to focus us on what it wants to teach us. So regardless of how exactly it happened from the perspective of the fly on the wall, had there been flies at that time, we can ask the question, how did the Torah want us to read this story? How does the Torah want to present it to us, and what are we supposed to learn here? So let's read this verse carefully, assuming, as we are, that the ocean bed existed. It just needed to be some of the land needed to be cleared away to make space for the rest of creation. So if we read it carefully, you could read it in a few different ways. We could say that the continents were raised, and when the continents were raised, the water flowed off into the oceans. Or you could say the opposite. Maybe the oceans were depressed at that time, meaning they had been flat, and the oceans got pushed down, and the water flowed off the continents. Or you could say maybe that the water hadn't been fluid before that. Maybe water had different properties until that point, and then Hashem gave them this new property where they flow downhill. So any of those is possible. I think the second one reads best into the wording of the Torah. When it says Yikavu Hamayim in the passive voice, let the waters be gathered, it doesn't say let them gather. So it doesn't sound like Hashem's giving them a new property, which would allow them to now do something different than they'd been doing before. Sounds like the water exists. Hashem did something else outside of the water, which caused the water to flow downhill. And what is it that he did? Well, it sounds like what he did is he did something. It sounds like the dry land was just an outcome of the flowing of the water. If the continents were raised and the water fell off of them, then it would have been the opposite. It would have said, let the continents, let the dry land be visible, and as an outcome, the water will flow off. But it doesn't say that. It says, let the water gather into one place, and as a consequence, the dry land will be visible. So seemingly, what the Torah is expressing is that Hashem caused these depressions where the seabed is to form, and as a consequence, the water flowed off in the passive voice, so the water didn't do anything, it just fell once the seabed was created, and then the continents also didn't do anything, they just appeared. Once the water was gone, the continents were visible. Seemingly, that's what the Torah is expressing. And why am I trying to figure this out? So I think there's a very important idea that the Torah is trying to focus our attention on. And that is, if you look at the seabed, I actually did the research, the average depth of the ocean is 12,080 feet on average.
12,080 feet.
Yes, approximately 2.2 miles. The average elevation of the continents, I'll look this one up also, but I forgot the number. It's about a quarter of that.
You mean the mountains?
Not the mountains. The average elevation of all the continents. If you take all the land on Earth, the average elevation.
How much? Quarter of that.
A quarter of that. It was like
Half a mile.
something like that. I had the number, I lost it.
Mm-hmm.
What would happen if the ocean were slightly less deep? All the continents would drown. So here Hashem made a perfect depression. He made these oceans into the perfect depth that the water could flow off of them and the continents would be revealed. If it were relatively slightly less deep, the continents would be drowned. So here is a perfect calculation. Like everything in creation, everything is perfectly calculated. Talk more about that later. Everything is perfectly calculated for this to work out. Including here we see the depth of the oceans. Verse 10 says, Vayikra Elokim layabasha eretz. Hashem called the dry land land. He called it Eretz. Now remember, Eretz had been created on day one. It says, Bereishis bara Elokim esa shamayim ve'esa aretz. He created shamayim, heaven, and aretz, the land. Meaning earth.
Yeah, okay.
But here, he's calling the dry land earth. And this follows the same principle we were talking about before, where Rakia is called Shamayim. Because the focus of the Torah and the focus of creation is for mankind to be able to live on earth and serve Hashem. What happens in the sea is important, but it's not the focus. It's not the focus of the Torah. It's not Hashem's purpose in creating earth. The purpose of the earth is the dry land, and therefore Yabasha, the dry land, gets called Eretz. It gets called earth because that's what it is. Earth is primarily the dry land because that's its purpose, to house humanity, to serve Hashem. And then Ulmikvei Hamayim Kara Yamim. Hashem calls the seas Yam. He calls them Yamim, seas. Vayar Elokim Kitov, and Hashem saw that it was good. Now the word Yam is related to the word Homeh. It's an idea that I'm taking from Rabbi Victor Miller. The word yam is related grammatically to the word homeh, which means turmoil. Yeah, which definitely describes the sea. The sea is always in turmoil. It's always moving. There's always waves. There's always storms all over in the ocean, which is caused by the size of the ocean. The ocean is so big that it creates this turmoil of constant movement. And that movement is also part of Hashem's perfect plan. It's a very important part of his plan. The fact that the ocean is moving and the fact that it's all connected, as it said in the previous verse, El Makom Echad, to one place, all the water is in one place, one very large place, and it's always moving. That's what regulates the climate, part of what regulates the climate. The fact that the ocean's always moving creates ocean spray, and the spray evaporates faster than sitting water, than stagnant water. And because it evaporates faster, it provides rain for us. The wind that's going over the ocean, because of this spray, the wind is able to pick up iodine, and it brings iodine to earth, to the dry land. Coastal countries, let me just look up this word, I forgot the word. There's a certain disease called goiter, which is caused by iodine deficiency.
Right.
Countries that live near the coast don't have that problem because there's iodine in their soil, and the soil produces the food that they eat, and they get iodine automatically.
Yeah, we have a deficiency here, and that's why they fortify all our food with iodine.
Yeah.
The bread, the milk.
Yeah. So now we've learned how to fortify food with iodine to correct that problem. But places far from the ocean don't get iodine. Places near the ocean do. And that's all part of Hashem's plan of creating this turmoil in the ocean and this ocean spray, which allows the iodine to wash ashore. And I'm sure there's much more to that plan. If we study the benefits of the movement of the sea, we'll see unlimited benefits of it. I'm just mentioning two. And that's all included in this word, yamim, seas, related to homeh. That was the first creation that Hashem made on the third day. And it says, Vayar Elokim ki tov, Hashem saw that it was good. And I believe I've mentioned this in the past, that the Ramban, whenever it says Vayar Elokim ki tov, whenever it says Hashem saw something was good, it means he was ratifying it. He created something, and now he pronounces that it's good. That means he wants to keep it. Now Hashem wasn't going to make a mistake. He didn't make anything and fail. But the Torah is expressing to us that whatever Hashem wanted to remain, remains. Whatever Hashem does not want to remain, does not remain. When he says ki tov, it's good, that means it's good. That means it's worth existing. If he ever decides something's not good, it will not exist. And as we pointed out last week, Rashi pointed out that on the second day, it doesn't say ki tov. It doesn't say that the second day's creation was good, because the second day's creation wasn't complete. All Hashem did on the second day was separate the upper waters from the lower waters, but he was still not done. He still had to separate out the water from the dry land. So that separation is concluded on the third day, and then it says, Vayar Elokim ki tov, Hashem ratified what he had done with the water. Now he makes a second creation. In Pasuk Yud Aleph, in verse 11, Vayomer Elokim, Hashem said, Tadshei haaretz deshe. Let the earth sprout herbage. The earth should be covered in plant life. Esev mazriya zera. Grasses that produce seeds, that scatter seeds. Eitz peri, as well as fruit trees. Osa pri limino, which produces fruit according to its kind, asher zaro vo, whose seeds are in it. Meaning the fruit trees are going to produce fruits with seeds in them, seeds in the fruits. Al haaretz, over the land, vayhi chen, and it was so. There's a number of very interesting points here. First one, Rashi makes the point There are two synonyms in this pasuk that refer both to herbage. They both refer to plants. It talks about desha and it talks about asev. And Rashi says the difference between those two words. Asev is an individual blade of grass or an individual plant or even an individual species of plants. Desha is usually used to mean herbage, meaning the foliage, where you see the earth covered in green. It could be in many different types. It could be the same type, but it's all greenery all over the earth is called desha. And each individual is called asev. Now, the Torah told us this for a reason. There's a reason why the Torah wants to focus on these two different words for greenery. A possible reason is that Hashem wanted to give us both of these qualities. He wanted to give us each individual plant, each individual asev, because each one benefits us. But he also wanted to give us desha. He wanted to give us turf. He wanted to give us greenery covering the ground, which if we're not going to focus on the individual plants, we're just focusing on the fact that it's green, Hashem created beauty for us. And that was its only purpose, to look nice. The fact that there's greenery everywhere, independent of the fact that each one is its own individual asev. Hashem provided us with desha. He provided us with a beautiful landscape, independent of the fact that he also provided us with asev. The second part of the verse says, Eitz peri, osa peri. Fruit trees which produce fruits. That's a bit redundant. What's the difference between fruit trees and trees which produce fruits? And then if you look at the next verse, it says that when the greenery actually sprouted out of the ground, it says trees which produce fruits. It doesn't call them fruit trees. So verse 11 says fruit trees which produce fruits, which is redundant. Verse 12 just says trees which produce fruits, which is a single expression. What's the difference and what's the purpose of this repetition? So Rashi, it's a fairly well-known Rashi, he quotes from the Gemara that the original command that Hashem gave was for fruit trees, meaning trees that taste like fruits. The wood of the tree was supposed to taste like fruits, and it was supposed to produce fruit. And then in verse 12, when the trees actually sprout, the trees didn't listen. Hashem commanded the trees to sprout, tasting like fruit, and they didn't do it. And that's a very difficult idea to understand. Because when Hashem says to do something, that's what happens. People are the only beings with free will. So what does it mean that the trees didn't listen to Hashem? What is that? What is that idea? So first of all, there is this concept that every physical object on earth has a corresponding spiritual entity. You could call it an angel, which is responsible for that physical object. So it wasn't really the trees that didn't listen, it was the angels that didn't listen. But that doesn't really solve our problem because angels also tend to listen to Hashem. They do have free will, but it's kind of a more complicated type of free will than we have. They generally don't disobey. So what is this idea that the trees didn't listen to Hashem? And also, if they didn't listen to Hashem, or put differently, if we're saying that trees have to listen to Hashem, and here they didn't, then obviously that was part of Hashem's plan, was that they wouldn't listen. So then why did he command them to do one thing and expect them to do something different? What happened there? So the Maharal, in his commentary on Rashi and the Gur Aryeh, the Maharal explains that we live in an imperfect world. Hashem created this world deliberately imperfect. And our job as human beings who serve Hashem is to perfect the world by serving Hashem. But he deliberately gave us an imperfect world that needs to be perfected. And in this imperfect world, the trees were not able to come up looking like trees, tasting like fruit. They weren't able to live in that perfect existence that Hashem wanted. Hashem wanted the earth to produce fruit, meaning the trunk of the tree would be fruit. And the fruit would then produce more fruit. That was something that in their imperfect state, they were incapable of doing. Now he goes a little deeper into this to explain why that particular thing was so impossible for this world. I'm not going to get into that part of it. But suffice to say that he says that this earth is imperfect, and the trees were not able to fulfill the command of Hashem. And that's where the Maharal stops. He doesn't go to the next step, but I'm going to go there. If that's true, then why did Hashem give the command? At least I don't think he speaks about this. Why did Hashem give the command? If he knew that the trees would not be able to fulfill the command, why did he give it? So we're saying again, we're saying that the earth is imperfect, the world is imperfect in its current state. The trees were not able to fulfill the command of Hashem. So then again, why did Hashem command it? So seemingly the answer is that even though the world is imperfect today, the time will come when the world is perfected. There's the concept of Mashiach. Once the world has reached perfection, Mashiach will come and complete the perfection of this world. Once it is perfected, Hashem's command will take effect, and the trees will taste like fruit. It will be completed. And Hashem wanted to give that command right at the outset, because that is the reality which he wants to create. But he did so with the understanding that that's not going to happen immediately. The world's going to start off in an imperfect state, and slowly over the course of history and through the divine service of human beings, develop into its perfected state. One more point on this verse. Hashem commands the trees to produce fruits limino, according to its species. Each tree would only produce trees of its own species. He doesn't say that to the grass. The other herbs, he just says that they should produce seeds. For the trees, he tells them to produce fruits and seeds according to their species. Each one only produce its own species. But in the next verse, when they actually come into existence, it says that the grass is all sprouted, liminehu, according to their species. They all stayed separate. And then the trees also only produce their own species. So why is that? Why is it that in verse 11, Hashem tells the grass to grow, and he tells the trees to grow according to their min, according to their species, not to produce anything else. And then in verse 12, the grass also does what was commanded to the trees. And Rashi explains, again based on the Gemara, that when the grass heard this command being given to the trees, the grass understood it to apply to themselves as well. And again, grass is inanimate, but the angels that control the grass, that are responsible for the grass, understood Hashem's command to the trees to apply to the grass as well. As the Gemara expresses it, as Rashi expresses it, they made what we call a kal v'chomer. They used a logical deduction. They deduced logically that the command applied to them as well. If the command applies to trees, which in any case grow separately, trees are very large, each one grows a few feet apart, they don't usually mix, and yet Hashem commanded them to keep separate, to keep the species separate, then certainly we, the grass, who grow all together, who grow mixed together, need to be very careful to keep our species separate. Now, who is the one who, right, the Gemara is putting this logical argument in the mouth of the grass, but as we're saying, it's not the grass, it's the angels that control the grass. I would be okay with suggesting that you could even say that this is just a poetic idea, that no one actually enunciated this argument. They were produced, and they understood that it was understood that Hashem's command applied to the grass as well. We do see here, though, the principle of Kal V'chomer, which is one of the ways which when we read the Torah, there are certain principles that are enunciated in the Midrash about how to read the Torah and how to understand the Torah, and one of them is Kal V'chomer. We're supposed to deduce principles based on, if the minor case and the major case, if something applies. In this case, it certainly must apply. In that case, that's a logical process, which is part of the proper study of the Torah. And here we see it in practice. When Hashem said to the trees that they are to produce only leminei, only according to their species, the species that are supposed to remain separate, it was understood, it didn't have to be spoken, that command applies to the grass also, and it immediately took effect. Hashem's command took effect as much on the grass as on the trees. Now this rule of lemino, this rule of species that Hashem made a rule, the species remain separate. Every species of plant and animal and people only produce their own species. They reproduce and always reproduce the same species. This is a law that Hashem made, and it has been kept perfectly ever since. There has never been a failure to reproduce according to the same species. And if we study how that works, there's actually an incredible process involved in this called genetics. If you study genetics, the amount of information being transmitted through the splitting of cells, through the replication of DNA, it's astronomical. You'll forgive me if I'm misrepresenting this information, because it's not exactly my field, but every time a cell splits, it has to replicate the DNA perfectly. And in each cell, there are, at least human cells, there are an estimated 3 billion pieces of information in the DNA of each cell. The number of cells which reproduce per day in a human body is estimated at 2 trillion. The number of people in the world is approximately 8 billion. Multiply those numbers together. Every day, the number of pieces of information in DNA which is replicated is 48 with 30 zeros after it. This astronomical number of pieces of information that needs to get replicated perfectly every day. And it does get replicated almost perfectly. There are sometimes errors. There are sometimes mistakes. There are people that have cancer. There are people that have Down syndrome. There are various genetic irregularities that can happen. They are all, without exception, as far as I know, very minor. They might make a big deal to the person, but in the scheme of things, they're very minor imperfections in the system. The person has a tumor growing in his body, which is devastating to his health, but the tumor itself is not that big of an aberration in his body, as compared with, let's say, growing a tail and starting to bark instead of talking. This idea of reproduction, according to our species, liminehu, this law holds true perfectly through astronomical numbers of replications of DNA. As I said, 48 with 30 zeros after it per day among humans. There are many other species. Humans are a small minority of the number of living beings on Earth. And that's only in one day, 48 with 30 zeros after it.
We don't have any description for it.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a name for that number.
That's the amount of the replication of DNA per day.
Yeah, of individual pieces of information. I don't know how someone could study genetics and not believe in God. If there's such a perfect system, such a carefully planned system. Now, listen carefully and notice that I'm not using the word miraculous. Miraculous implies supernatural. That means there's nature, and this is beyond nature. This is supernatural. I'm not using that word. It's not supernatural. It is natural. But it's so perfect and so carefully planned that it clearly points to a very infinitely wise planner who designed it all. For so many perfect replications to happen over and over again. That's the law of leminehu, lemino, that Hashem pronounced at the creation of the plants and at the creation of the animals and of people. Now, for us as Jews, we have to observe this law actively because we're not allowed to mix species. We're not allowed to graft trees together. We're not allowed to crossbreed animals together. It's called kilayim. It's an active law that we have to keep. But for the rest of humanity and for the rest of the plant world and the animal world, this is a law that they all keep without really thinking about it. They just do it. And plants can't really think at all, but they just do it. They keep this law. The cedar tree always produces cedars. It never tries to produce apples, never tries to produce oranges. It just does what it does because that's what Hashem commanded it to do. And this law of Lebinehu is supposed to serve for us as a model. Hashem created the world and he created each species in the world. He created what he created and he doesn't want that tampered with. He doesn't want us to tamper with it. He doesn't want creation to tamper with it. He created the world and he wants that. That is the world. That's the world he created. It's not supposed to crossbreed. It's not supposed to change. Everything he created is the way he created it and the way he wants it to be. And whenever we see trees and animals and people reproducing according to their kind and only according to their kind, it's a testimony to Hashem's creation, to Hashem's creative act at the beginning of history, his immutable creation that he made. The only time that things do crossbreed is when people get involved. People crossbreed animals, people crossbreed trees, and even then it only works when you have similar animals or similar trees, and then the product is often not as good as the original. Mules can't have babies. I don't think any hybrid animal can have babies, can reproduce. Because Hashem's world is the way he wanted it. And his Lamino law applies and holds true. And that's a model for us. When we keep Hashem's laws, the laws that Hashem gave us is also part of Laminehu. Hashem made species of trees. He wants them to be species of trees. He doesn't want to ask. He doesn't want them to ask, why am I a cedar tree and not an apple tree? Well, because you are, because Hashem made you. That's your job in this world. And why am I an octopus and not a dog? Because that's the way Hashem made you. Why am I a person? Why am I a Jew? Because that's the way Hashem made me. And the way Hashem wants the world to be run for plants is he wants them to stay separate. For animals, he wants them to stay separate. For human beings, he wants them to keep 7 laws. The way he wants human beings to exist in this world, he wants them to keep the 7 laws, not to kill, not to serve idolatry, not to commit incest or adultery, not to eat live animals or the limbs of live animals, etc. Those are the laws that he made for humanity. For Jews, he made more laws. Why? Because that's the way he wants us to live. We can study individual mitzvahs and try to figure out reasons for them or symbolism behind them or ideas behind them, but the bottom line for every mitzvah is liminehu. Hashem created us as human beings, he created us as Jews, and he wants us to do these things. That's how he wants us to relate to the world that we're in. I'll just read this last verse, Pasuk Yud Beis. Vatotzei haaretz deshem. So this is the verse we've already referred to twice, but I'll just read it. The earth produced deshe, it produced this greenery, the herbage, esev mazria zera luminehu, grasses and herbs that scatter seeds according to their kind. Ve'etz, and trees, not fruit trees, because they didn't taste like fruits. Osa pri asher zarobo, that produces fruit with seeds in it, liminehu, according to its kind. Vayara Elokim ki tov, and Hashem saw that it was good. Vayiera vayiboker yom shlishi, and it was evening, it was morning, the third day. We'll stop for questions, and I believe, yeah, everyone can unmute if you want to ask a question. From you?
So what I remember from when we were in the high school and we were learning about the evolution of the earth.
Yeah.
That the earth was first created as one piece and then slowly it separated, that created the different continents.
Yeah.
Now, I think that this is after what we're talking here. Yeah. So because when Hashem said that Yikavu Hamayim, so just one piece of land and all around it were water.
Yeah, according to that theory. Yeah, I don't think that's proven, but if it was that way, then that's what happened.
Very nice, very good.
When you're talking about genetic modification,
yeah,
if food sources are made GMO, are they not kosher?
Well, first of all, GMO is not the same thing as grafting. The prohibition that we have as Jews not to graft, I say as Jews because everyone else is allowed to graft, even though Laminehu applies to all of creation. But non-Jews are not commanded to keep the species separate. They're allowed to graft trees. We're not. But GMO is not grafting, so I don't know that we're meaning to genetically modify the food. I don't know that we have any prohibition against that. In any case, we're allowed to eat grafted fruit. I believe grapefruits are grafted. You're allowed to eat the product of it. You're just not allowed to create it, with the exception of grapes. Grapes mixed with other plants we're not allowed to eat. But I imagine that's not done. Otherwise, we'd need a hechsher on it. I've never heard of putting a hechsher on grapes. But otherwise, other fruits you are allowed to eat, even if they are grafted. We're just not allowed to do it ourselves. And you can ride on a mule if you want. If you ever visit the Grand Canyon, you'll get the mule rides there. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Okay. It was interesting to see that. Yeah.
Back to the upper waters and the lower waters.
Yeah.
Geologically, a lot of the continents were formed by volcanic activity, like, for example, Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands or whatever.
Yeah.
If that happened and it caused the upper waters to fall down and merge with the lower waters, is that
What do you mean by that? Do you mean that it caused rain to fall down?
Yeah.
I mean, if we understand the upper waters to mean the clouds, then there's a constant give and take between lower waters and upper waters. We don't have to look at the formation of Hawaii. We can say, every time it rains, the sun evaporates the water from the ocean and the lakes. It goes up into the atmosphere and then falls back down. So there's a constant give and take there, but there's also always clouds in the air. Somewhere on Earth, there's always clouds and there's always oceans. So there is upper waters and lower waters, but there is an exchange between them.